And we're very grateful today that He is Lord of all. And on this 4th of July, you think about, I feel very blessed to grow up in America and to be an American. And no matter what happens and where we're at, whether we are part, America continues to some might decline or continues to be a strong nation, God is still Lord of all. And we are called to walk according to His ways. Last week I looked at, we started looking at the book of Daniel. And we talked about how we are living in a post-Christian culture, a culture that is not Christian, that's the value system that most of society lives by is not Christian. According to George Barna, only about 6% of Americans have a biblical worldview. About 25% of Americans have joined the nuns, not the Catholics, but those who don't affiliate with any religion. And we're living at a time where Christians have been marginalized. We looked at how Daniel grew up being settled and he grew up in a setting under King Josiah, where following the law, following God was something that was rewarded and protected. And in 3 short years, he went from that point in his life to Josiah being killed, to the Babylonians coming in, taking his family. And he was taken to a strange land. He was given a new name. He was probably, we don't know for sure, but more than likely he's probably castrated. He was put in this intense 3-year indoctrination program designed to teach him a new language, a new literature. The program controlled everything down to what he ate. It was designed to shape him into the image of Babylon. But there was one thing that the system did not account for. I love how the book of Daniel lays out this whole indoctrination program. And then you have verse 8 of Daniel 1. Verse 8 of Daniel 1. But Daniel resolved not to defile himself with the royal food and wine. He resolved not to defile himself. And so, in doing so, he unintentionally challenged the authority of the king of Babylon, Nebuchadnezzar, a king who is known to really use any tactic necessary to squash his opponents. You know, we as believers live in a system that wants to indoctrinate us. Now, this is, we are taught, Satan is in charge of this world system. We know that he's opposed to God. And we are in a system that is opposed to God and wants to indoctrinate us. And right now is the time to decide what will compromise or what is not compromise, and what you're going to do to follow Jesus with your whole heart, despite the consequences that it might bring. And like I said last week, I don't think that we as believers in most cases will end up in prison or killed like in hard totalitarian societies like China or the former Soviet Union or some Islamic countries today. But I do believe that we are going to face soft capitalistic totalitarianism, in which corporations will pressure its employees, its customers, and even those people they buy from, and those other businesses they support to adhere to a certain social agenda. And if they don't, they will get fired, they will be deplatformed, they're going to be blacklisted, denied tenure, and otherwise socially and financially isolated. So as we live in this time period in which we live, I think it's important that we draw from Daniel some principles that we can see in the way that we live our life in today that is definitely post-Christian, that is opposed to Christianity, and that really in many cases does not have any idea what Christianity is really all about. And so we're going to look at several things, several items from the book of Daniel. So let's go back to verse 8. verse 8 of Daniel 1, I'm going to read again. It says, "But Daniel resolved not to defile himself with the royal food and wine. He asked the chief official for permission not to defile himself in this way." They had taken Daniel's name, but he knew that he was not his name. They changed his name, but he knew that he was not his name. His identity was more than that. He was going to be taught all kinds of literature that he probably would disagree with, but he knew the truth. And so even though they asked him to participate in that classroom of literature, he knew that they really couldn't affect his soul. And if you have just graduated from college, if you're going through college classes, I'm sure you've sat through multiple hours of teaching that you probably disagreed with, that you thought was false, that you thought was wrong. And that's not necessarily wrong for you to do that, because you still can come back to the truth. Now, you have to be careful about in those situations, but that is not necessarily compromise when we do that. But this eating of food was something that was different. He was called to actively violate his conscience. And all the things that, other things that people were doing to him, but this was something that he himself had to participate in. And he said, you know what? I'm not going to do that. This food was probably not kosher. It was probably offered to idols. And to eat this food would be a definite violation of his conscience and the law of God. And this was one area where Daniel and his 3 friends felt like they had to stand. And they were standing alone. The likelihood that there's a good likelihood that the people that were in this class were people that they grew up with. I mean, they said they took them from the noble families of Israel. So I'm sure Daniel and his 3 friends knew the other people in this group, at least some of them, but yet they were the only 4 who stood up and said, you know, we're not going to do this. The first thing you notice that Daniel acted was that Daniel acted with respect. He didn't go straight to a hunger strike. He didn't stage a protest. He didn't tweet some snarky remark with some creative hashtag. He simply went to the person in charge and made a request. It wasn't like he wasn't angry. I'm sometimes amazed and amused at the same time how there may be some kind of policy that's handed down that doesn't make sense. Now, I'm not talking about a moral issue in this case, just some policy that doesn't make sense. And people will walk around and they'll talk among themselves how crazy this policy is and how it should be changed and all these different things, but they won't go to the person who made the policy. And so they do all this complaining. Several years ago, there was this issue that came down, and which in my mind was completely ridiculous. And if I would tell you the situation, I think all of you would agree that it was completely ridiculous. But somehow it was passed down. I went to my building administrator. He couldn't do anything about it. So I went, follow the chain of command. And it just so happened that I think it was divine intervention. I happened to talk to somebody who was supposedly in charge of this. And I said, so why are we doing this? Oh, that's not the policy. Oh, it's not the policy. Well, this is what I was told. So I went to my building administrator, and the policy was changed by that afternoon. And it was something that happened. And that wasn't something that, that wasn't a moral issue. It was just kind of a crazy kind of idea that they wanted to implement. But if I'd have gone and got all upset about that and not acted in respect, it probably wouldn't have got changed. So if you do that, there's basically 3 things that will happen. Either they'll see your point of view and change the policy, or you will get more perspective on why the policy is being implemented, or they'll keep the policy and you'll just need to deal with it. Now, this issue that Daniel faced was a moral issue. My issue wasn't a moral issue, it was just bad policy. But this was a moral issue, but they still approached him with respect and honor. If you go to verse 9, it says, Now God caused the official to show favor and sympathy to Daniel. So even though we live in a system that is opposed to God, there will be many times that God will allow us to have favor in the eyes of our superiors. That is why we always approach these situations with respect. We don't want to burn bridges that God has divinely built for us. If you turn to 1 Peter 3, verses 15 and 16. 1 Peter 3, verses 15 and 16. It says, but in your hearts set apart Christ as Lord. Always be prepared to give an answer to everyone who asks to give you a reason for the hope that you have. But do this with gentleness and respect, keeping a clear conscience so that those who speak maliciously against your good behavior in Christ may be ashamed of their slander. So this sounds a lot like Daniel purposing in his heart not to be defiled. In this case, we are supposed to set apart Christ as Lord. And as a result, we will be different. We will live with hope. This passage comes right in the middle of describing how we are supposed to live our life when we are suffering persecution at the hands of other people. And what we are to do is to continue to live with hope despite the circumstances. And when we do that, it will bring up questions. And we need to answer why we have this hope. But we're supposed to do it with gentleness and respect. Gentleness and respect. You know, in the past, Christianity has been attacked by, I call them angry atheists. They're upset because, for whatever reason, most of the time they grew up in the church and they were hurt by the church. They became these atheists, and they're angry atheists, and they're angry at God, and they are going to, make God look dumb. They're going to make anybody else who believed in God look dumb. That seemed to be, where a lot of the anger towards Christianity came from. And sometimes Christianity has rightly been accused of hypocrisy when leaders have fallen short of many of the ideals they preach. But there is a new motivation that has come onto the scene that really caused some people to hate Christianity. And if you don't understand this new source of anger, you're going to be taken by surprise and completely confused. Now, a quick review of the news is going to show you that there is a big controversy over this idea that's called critical race theory. And I'm not going to get into all the details of that theory. It would take a class, multiple classes, to do that. But I want to highlight one thing that, depending on what circles you are in, where you work, is going to cause deep-seated anger towards Christianity. And the person that is angry probably won't even know why they're angry at Christianity. Critical race theory came into being about in the 1980s. But critical theory has been around for a long time. One of the underlying theories of critical race theory is a thing called hegemony. I even wrote it down exactly how to say that word. But hegemony. And what happens is communist Marxist philosophers, according to Karl Marx, he looked around the society in which he lived, mid-1800s, and he looked at this society, and he saw that capitalists, the rich, the wealthy, the owners, basically controlled the society. They made life of the workers horrible. They all moved into urban areas, and life for those workers were absolutely horrible. And Karl Marx said, listen, this is what's going to happen. He said, I think what's going to happen is these workers are going to band together. They're going to take over the factories, and everybody is going to then work according to their ability, and everybody will get back according to their need. It sounds a wonderful thing. The problem is it's never worked that way. And the revolution that Marx expected never happened. What happened was you have pockets of revolutionaries, say Russia or China, who came in and they took over the government and then they implemented communism, but you never had this natural rise up of the workers. And so by the 1920s, it looked like, you had pockets of communism, but you never had this rise up of the workers. So there's a communist Marxist philosopher named Antonio Gramsci, and he observed that this capitalistic societies and the elite economic class kept their status, not necessarily through brute domination or coercion, but largely through consensual means. And he theorized that what's happening is unconsciously the ruling class dominated the culture, thoughts, and values of the lower class, and the lower class pretty much unconsciously accepted it. So it happened unconsciously, you don't realize really what's happening, but the upper class continually kept their status, the lower class continually kept their lower status because of all these systems that were put in place to keep people where they're at. And a lot of it, even though they might have goodwill towards the lower class, a lot of this happened subconsciously. Now, what happened in the late 1980s was that they applied this theory to race. And so what they said was the dominant race, unconscious of its privilege, have unconsciously done things to maintain their power. According to critical race theory, we know this because there is inequitable outcomes among different groups. And anytime there's an inequitable outcome, there has to be systematic racism involved. This theory not only applies to race, but applies to men and women. It applies to straight people over the LGBTQ plus community, and it applies to religion, especially Christianity. And as you go through life today, and depending what group of people you work with, depending what field you work with, you are going to experience a lot of hatred and anger towards Christianity because of this ideology that's being taught. And Christianity is viewed as a religion that's promoted racism and oppression, and we do not know, and we do know that Christianity has been used to justify all kinds of things, including racism and slavery. This does not mean that that's the truth. An honest view of history would show that Christianity has done much more to get rid of injustices that have been perpetrated. If you go to the Museum of the Bible, they have many, many displays. One of the displays that is at the Museum of the Bible is the Slaves Bible. And the reason it's called the Slaves Bible is because they went through and they took out sections of the Bible that had anything to do with slavery or freedom or anything they thought might give the slaves idea that what was happening to them was wrong. They took it out because they did not want that kind of indoctrination to go to their slaves. And they thought that slaves would read the Bible and they would work to end slavery. Now, in some circles, Christianity is going to face a great deal of hatred. There's no doubt. You have to understand that there are pockets of America where you have 25% of Americans not adhering to any religion. Okay, 25%. So that means there are pockets of America where there are people who do not know a single committed Christian. I mean, that's what happens. There's pockets of America, especially if you go to the Northeast or some urban areas in California. There are people who do not know a committed Christian. And so their perspective on Christianity is that it's an oppressive religion, and that Christianity is against a whole list of things, and there has nothing to do with the relationship with Jesus. And the sad truth is that many times Christianity has perpetrated those myths as well. So in some circles, you're going to face a great deal of hatred because of some of the things that were taught and the things that people are the way they view the world. The challenge will be to act with gentleness and respect and continue to love each and every person as made in the image of God, and in some cases love enough to call sin, sin. I just read this past week, just to give you an example, Governor Cuomo's daughter, I read an article, he's the governor of New York, and I read an article about her. She thought that she was bisexual. Well, now she understands that, and I don't even remember what the prefix is of her sexuality is now. Demi, thank you. She's demisexual, which simply means that she's attracted sexually to somebody who she's emotionally connected to. To me, that sounds like she's pretty normal. Somebody who's, in some sense, and somebody who's, that's mostly how women operate. They're attracted to people who they're emotionally connected to. And through that article, one thing she said was that she hopes she never needs to make these kinds of, there comes a time when she never needs to make these kinds of announcements, because everybody will just experience fluid sexuality. That's the kind of mindset that is in some parts of our society in which we live. And the things that is oppressing that is going to be Christianity. And the mindset of Christianity is going to oppress that mindset. And so Christianity is the oppressor. But we are called to call sin, sin. We are called to suffer. We are called to do this with gentleness and respect and continue to love each and every person as made in the image of God. Live so that your good behavior will cause them to be ashamed. One of the powerful things of the civil rights movement was Martin Luther King Jr.'s emphasis on nonviolence. When a group of African American young people would go into a white-only lunch counter and sit there and get ketchup sprayed on their face and mustard dumped on them and called all kinds of hateful insults, and they did nothing. They took it. It highlighted the immorality of those perpetrating those atrocities and the laws that allowed it to happen. That is what we as believers are called to do. Walk that same path. We are going to, as we are slandered, as we are persecuted, as we still have hope and still act with gentleness and respect, it will highlight the immorality of our accusers and the truth of the gospel. Some will respond. Others will become even more angry when that is exposed. So, we are to act with love so that your good behavior shames those that oppose Christ. If you go to verse 10 of Daniel, Daniel 1, verse 10. It says, "But the official told Daniel, 'I'm afraid of my lord the king, who has assigned your food and drink. Why, he should see you looking worse than other young men your age. The king would then have my head because of you.'" So sometimes those that are enforcing the rules that cause us to violate our conscience are only trying to save their skin. They might not agree with the ideology. They might not agree with what's being said. They simply want to save their skin. And so when you go to them with respect, when you ask them, what are your goals? What do you want to accomplish? Then you have a chance to meet their goal. This guy, what he wanted, I don't want you to look bad. I don't want you to look skinny. I don't want you to look like I'm not feeding you. When you go before the king, I want you to look healthy. And Daniel says, okay, I can do that. And so they discover that he didn't really care if they ate the food or not. What they really wanted was, he really wanted them to look good. And so if Daniel could achieve those same results of him looking good, and he's able to keep his conscience in doing this and doing that, then they said, yes, you can do that. And so in verse 11, Daniel then said to the guard, whom the chief official appointed over Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, "Please test your servants for 10 days. Give us nothing but vegetables to eat and water to drink. Then compare our appearance with that of the young men who eat the royal food, and treat your servants in accordance with what you see." So he agreed to this test, and he tested them for 10 days. So Daniel put his convictions to the test. It took a certain amount of faith for Daniel to do this. If we sat down and he said, "You know what, this guy's going to eat pork, he's going to eat all this other rich food, the other people are just going to eat vegetables. At the end of 10 days, we're going to bring them in here, and we're going to see who looks the best." And it took a certain amount of faith for Daniel to say, "I think my vegetables will outdo all this nice rich food." And God intervened, and sure enough, that is exactly what happened. And so verse 15 says that at the end of 10 days, they looked healthier and better nourished than any of the young men who ate the royal food. So the guard took away their choice food and wine they were to drink and gave them vegetables instead. So God came through. He blessed their physical appearance. He caused them to look healthier than those who ate the richer food. Daniel and his friends lived by their convictions, and the official was not going to get in trouble for not doing his job. This was accomplished without protest and really without any real persecution. Sometimes what Christians call suffering for Jesus is not actually suffering. Sometimes when Christians say, I'm suffering because I won't do this, or I'm suffering because my boss asked me to do this and I'm not going to do it, or you have all these perceived suffering. Sometimes you're not really suffering because of your convictions. You're suffering because you're a jerk, and because you held your convictions in such a way that no one really wants to be around you anyway. And so you are suffering not because of your convictions. You're suffering because you were a jerk with the way that you carried out your convictions. We are called to be gentle. We are called to humility, and we are called to stand for the truth. Verse 17. To these 4 young men, God gave knowledge and understanding of all kinds of literature and learning. And Daniel could understand visions and dreams of all kinds. At the end of the time set by the king to bring them in, the chief official presented them to Nebuchadnezzar. The king talked with them, and he found none equal to Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. So they entered the king's service. In every matter of wisdom and understanding about which the king questioned them, he found them 10 times better than all the musicians and enchanters in his whole kingdom. And Daniel remained there until the first year of King Cyrus. So God blessed their commitment to him. They passed the test of faithfulness. God was going to promote them within the system of Babylon. And he was going to continue to use these 4 young men to allow the Babylonians that Jehovah God, was king of the universe. He was going to use these men to show that. And as we go through Babylon, or go through this story of Daniel and living in Babylon, you're going to see continually how they live in the system that God placed them in. They work to do good in the system. They are committed to their convictions. And when they commit to their conviction, God is glorified. It's something that happens continually through this passage. He protected and preserved them within a system to spread his glory. But this would never have happened if they decided they would not be defiled. Had they not acted with respect, and had they not looked out for the well-being of their superior. Those 3 things, their ability to live here, their ability to show God to the world, would not have happened if they had not, and I'm going to repeat, had not committed not to be defiled, had not acted with respect, and had not looked out for the well-being of their superior. As you go through life, some of you may get fired for your convictions. That's a possibility. Some of you may need to step down from positions. That's a possibility. But there will be some of you that God will also preserve to continue to spread His glory wherever He places you within the system that He's called you. And I'd like just to close and just remind you that God has called each of us to live at this time in history. God knew it. God designed it. God designed us to live right now where we're living for a special purpose. And let's not squander that opportunity by not living up to our convictions, by living our convictions in such a way that brings disgrace to God, and by looking within ourselves and trying to protect ourselves without looking to better those around us. And so, in closing, that's my encouragement to you. God has called you to live in this time for a special purpose. Don't squander it. God will give you the grace. He is in control. He is Lord. Even though here in Babylon, the articles from the temple were sitting in the temples of the Babylonian gods. It looked like the Babylonian gods had won. God's still in control. God is going to show the Babylonians who's the ultimate ruler. That's where we're at today. It might look like, Christianity's on decline. It might look like there's only 6% of the people really following Jesus in the United States. That might be true. But God is He used 4 young men to show the Babylonian Empire His power, His work. And I believe that He's going to use that 6% here in the United States to show the world, show the United States His power and that He's still God. And I believe that. You might need to suffer. You might need to be uncomfortable. But I believe that's what God has for us as we look to the future. Let's pray. Dear Lord, I just want to thank You for this day. Thank You for Your goodness to us. Thank You so much that You are in control and that You're all powerful. And Lord, I just ask that You would just give each person wisdom and guidance where You've called them. And Lord, I want to thank You that no matter what, that You're King and that we can do that. And Lord, I pray, Lord, that as we go through our life, that we would be true to our convictions, that we would hold those convictions with gentleness and with kindness, but we would stand firm. Lord, I pray that as we do that, You would be glorified in our life. I pray that where we work, that we would look out for the well-being of our employers and those who are over us and the well-being of our community and our country. And Lord, as we do that, I pray that You would bless us and preserve us as we walk in step with Your Spirit. And I ask this in Jesus' name. Amen.